Got my coffee!
Hi. It's day one of our Great Plains USA road trip, which begins in Euless, Texas. We say goodbye to Ross and Masha, and we're on our way. We're heading north to Oklahoma City for our first stop. We avoided using tolls the whole trip. Well, not that there were any tolls on most of the trip, except in the Dallas area, but we still avoided them as the rental car company charges $10 per day, plus the toll if any toll roads are used. We took Interstate 35 north through Texas. Interstate 35 runs from Laredo, Texas, on the Mexican border, all the way up to Duluth, Minnesota, which is on the southwestern tip of Lake Superior. We'll take I-35 as far as Oklahoma City. On the right are some of the many silos and also trains that we saw on this trip. We're crossing the border into Oklahoma, which is the second state on our road trip, and now on to Oklahoma City. It took about an hour and 20 minutes to get from Euless to the Oklahoma border. We're now in Oklahoma City, and a quick stop at the Oklahoma State Capitol building.
300 feet, turn left.
Then it's on to the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, which is well worth a visit. It's very well done, and we spent over 2 hours here and could have stayed longer.
This is Jake Tiger. He's still relative. Probably should say what his money was born or something. But anyway, he's really not.
This sculpture is called Coming Through the Rye. And this sculpture is of William F. Cody, better known as Buffalo Bill. An obligatory visit to the gift shop, and we're on our way again, this time heading for Dodge City, Kansas. On the right, there's a pump jack in operation. I thought these were something you only saw in old movies, but we saw a lot of them in Texas and Oklahoma. Some working, some not. We need to head northwest from Oklahoma City to get to Dodge City, driving through lots of wide open farmland. There are so many wind turbines in this part of Oklahoma. Quite an eyesore in my opinion, but I guess it's extra income for the farmers. We're crossing into our third state, Kansas.
Welcome to Kansas.
We encounter still more wind turbines in Kansas. We finally arrive at Dodge City at about 7 p.m. That's Boot Hill Museum directly in front of us there, which we'll be visiting first thing in the morning.
In a quarter of a mile, turn left onto 11th Avenue.
And that's the end of day one. This is where our journey took us today. And to get some perspective, we start day 2 with a visit to Boot Hill Museum, which contains many original artefacts and a recreated Old West town with many original buildings from Dodge City. On weekends there is a simulated gunfight, but when we were here it was very quiet. Fiona's checking out the general store, which has one of the original cash registers on display. And of course, the visit wouldn't be complete for Fiona without a stop at the gift shop. Outside the museum is engine number 1139, which was owned by the Atchison, Topeka and Santa Fe Railway Company. As we were leaving Dodge City, we noticed this rather unique sign at the eastern entrance to the town. We're driving east through Kansas, and we came across these rather iconic looking grain elevators that are typically seen in movies, so I had to stop and take some photos. We'd been looking for somewhere to stop for lunch, quite unsuccessfully, so we decided to turn off the highway and go into Stafford, Kansas. All we could find was one little restaurant on the left. We drove further down the street, but the cafe on the right had closed down, so if we wanted to eat, it seemed like GV restaurant was the only option, and we headed back there. It turned out that it was a Mexican restaurant, but it had other options as well. The other diners were some cowboys listening to the cattle auctions on one of their phones. Back on the road, heading for Kansas City. More silos ahead and another train. On the left, as we were driving through Emporia, Kansas, we came across Freddy's Frozen Custard and Steak Burgers. It is a chain of retro-style 50s diners. And the frozen custard was delicious. I wanted to have dinner at Joe's Kansas City Barbecue, which is one of the original barbecue joints in Kansas City. But when we pulled in, the car park was almost completely full.
That's popular, isn't
We
it?
eventually parked.
Wow.
When I walked around to the entrance, the line was right out the door. We didn't have time to wait, so I was back on the road to our destination for the night. We're now leaving Kansas and entering Missouri, the fourth state on our journey so far. We just caught a glimpse of the Kansas City downtown, which is actually in Missouri. We're back on Interstate 35, which we used a couple of days ago to drive to Oklahoma City. Now we're crossing the Missouri River and continuing on to our accommodation for the night in Bethany, Missouri, arriving at about 8 p.m. This is where we drove today, generally heading northeast. And again, for perspective. This morning we're back on the road before 8 a.m, still driving on Interstate 35. A short time later and we're crossing into our fifth state, Iowa.
Welcome to Iowa.
It's time to leave the interstate and head for Winterset.
Take exit 52, then sharp left onto County Road.
On the way, we unexpectedly came across a covered bridge that I didn't realise we would be driving past. I had planned to visit some other covered bridges, but hadn't planned on this one. Fiona spotted it just as I was about to drive past it. This is the Imes Covered Bridge, built in 1870. It's one of the bridges of Madison County. That was a nice bonus with an unexpected find.
Kept it in good nick, haven't you?
Now on to one of the bridges I had planned to visit. This one requires a drive on a dirt road to get to it. This is Holywell Covered Bridge. I enjoyed standing here for a short time, watching the leaves falling from the trees in this country lane. We started to drive to Winterset, but noticed another good view of the bridge from the modern day bridge. It's a nice drive through the streets of Winterset. And then into Winterset City Park to see another covered bridge. This one is the Cutler Donohoe Covered Bridge. And this is the main reason we came to Winterset, the John Wayne Birthplace Museum. This time we started in the gift shop, much to Fiona's delight, as you have to go through it to enter the museum. There is also a John Wayne Museum in Fort Worth, Texas, but I think I enjoyed this one in Winterset, Iowa more. That's a model of the Alamo. We visit the real place later in our trip. And this is the house John Wayne was born in. This is John Wayne Drive and the Madison County Courthouse. We had lunch at Frosty's, which is an institution in Winterset. The food was good and quite cheap. I had a burger and Fiona had a hot dog, and we both had frozen custard. It's nice to drive on the back roads for a while and get off the highways, much more interesting. But it's only for a brief time, as we're heading for Interstate 80. We're getting on to Interstate 80 and heading west to Nebraska. Interstate 80 stretches all the way across the country from Teaneck, New Jersey in the east to San Francisco in the west. Quite unusual sculptures on the right. Now we're crossing the Missouri River once again and entering our sixth state, Nebraska. We're heading into Lincoln, Nebraska, to see the state capitol building. It's quite different to many other state capitol buildings, with a tall tower in the middle. And there is a statue of Lincoln around one side, which I guess is to be expected in a city called Lincoln. We continue west on Interstate 80. No surprise really that there's more open plains and farmland. We're arriving at our accommodation for the night in Grand Island, Nebraska at about 5:15 p.m, which is nice after a couple of late arrivals the first two nights. Here's where we went today, initially heading north, then mostly west. And the wider view. It's It's day 4 and we're off to an early start this morning, on the road before 7:30. We pass our first train for the day. It's a long one.
Carrying coal. Train.
Finally made it to the end. It's a nice time of day to be on the road in the early morning light, driving through the cornfields of Nebraska. We're heading northwest on Nebraska State Highway 2 towards South Dakota. We're actually driving through Cairo now. Cairo, Nebraska, that is. Now we're driving through Broken Bow, Nebraska, one of the bigger towns we've driven through so far today.
Courthouse.
We continue on our journey towards South Dakota, across a lot of fairly flat, open plains through Nebraska. About 4 hours after leaving Grand Island this morning, we're crossing into our 7th state, South Dakota. South Dakota has 2 time zones. The eastern part is on Central Time, and the western part is on Mountain Time. We've entered South Dakota in Todd County, which is the southwesternmost county that is on Central Time, so our time didn't change going from Nebraska into South Dakota, but it will soon. We passed the Tesla Cybertruck, which is quite unusual in these parts. We didn't see many electric cars out here at all. We're about to cross into Jackson County, which is on Mountain Time, so we gain 1 hour. 12:30 p.m. becomes 11:30 a.m. We had been looking for somewhere to stop for petrol and lunch for quite a while. Populated areas in this part of South Dakota are very sparse.
Where's the front door?
We came across this gas station, which just looked like a big shed. So Fiona asked someone if they sell food in there, and she said they do have some.
America.
We weren't sure how to get in. We were expecting to see glass doors like at regular gas stations, but this only had solid metal doors.
That door.
We went in and were surprised to find that there was a mini supermarket in there. You would have no idea from the outside what's in there.
Hi. Excuse me, can you buy food in there? Lunch?
The delis will serve, they have sandwiches and stuff.
Oh,
They're
okay.
great, thank you.
After getting lunch and petrol, we hit the road again. I wanted to wash the windscreen, but there was no squeegee that most service stations have.
All beat up and rusty.
I just swung the car around to get another view on camera of this place.
The white car.
We've never come across anything like this before.
Rusting up. Right, look at it, that red one.
We're heading for Badlands National Park, and as we get closer, there's a noticeable change in the landscape.
Certainly has changed.
We came to interior South Dakota, which is right near the southeastern entrance to Badlands National Park, and there was my opportunity to clean the windscreen before we head into the park. The GoPro footage looks much better with a clean windscreen. Let's go into Badlands National Park. I show our annual National Park Pass, and we're on our way. The annual pass cost $80, but to pay individually for the parks we visited would have cost us $180, so it is worth getting. Of course, we had to stop at the visitor centre / gift shop as a priority. It really is quite unique driving through Badlands. I wouldn't say it is spectacular, but it certainly is very different to anything we've seen before. A brief stop to view the unusual landscape. And we continue on our way. We're now ascending to the top of the plateau where we'll get better views of the landscape.
I bet you're
We've stopped at White River Valley Overlook to take in the view. It looks like some folks are planning on enjoying the view for quite a while, setting up their chairs. We're arriving at Panorama Point, so let's check out the view. We are on our way out of the park when we come across some bison, the first ones we have seen on our trip.
I don't need to get out of the car.
If you look closely, you can also see some prairie dogs too. We're leaving Badlands National Park now, and we're on our way to the town of Wall, South Dakota. We're approaching Wall. The big draw card for this town is Wall Drugstore, which the billboards are advertising, or more commonly just called Wall Drug. It's no longer just a drugstore, but rather takes up pretty much the whole block and has cowboy-themed stores and also restaurants. Let's have a look around in here. Back on the road again, and we're heading for Keystone, South Dakota to spend the night.
Yep, that's all right.
Continue on I-90 west for 48 miles.
We've arrived in Keystone just after 5 p.m.
In
and we're just going to
600
have a look at the
feet,
shops
turn left onto
before it
Roy
gets
Street,
too late
Winter
and they
Street.
close. Just stop for a minute and take some photos.
Yep.
Take the next left.
This is where our drive took us today, mostly heading northwest. And in perspective. First up today, we're heading to Mount Rushmore.
Oh, that's dangerous.
I had planned on approaching it from the south on Iron Mountain Road. There are supposed to be good views of it from Norbeck Overlook and on exiting some of the tunnels on that road. We drove a little way along Iron Mountain Road and came across a view of Mount Rushmore in the distance. This is our first view of Mount Rushmore. We continued on Iron Mountain Road, looking forward to better views as we got closer. But we were disappointed to discover that the road was closed. So there was nothing we could do but to turn around and go back the way we had come, back to Keystone and on to Mount Rushmore that way.
For this road.
About half an hour later, we were getting close, with good views of the mountain on the way up. It's quite an impressive view, walking down the avenue towards the mountain. The flags of every state are flying here. From what I have read, the 4 presidents were chosen because they represented the most important events in the history of the United States. Washington represented the birth, Jefferson, growth, Roosevelt, development, and Lincoln, preservation. Every night over summer, there is a lighting ceremony where the mountain is lit up, which attracts around 2,500 people every night to the amphitheatre. This was the first time we have seen a chipmunk. On our previous visits to the US, we had seen plenty of squirrels, but to see a chipmunk was special. It's hard to keep up as it darts all over the place. Back on the road, and we're now heading for Deadwood, South Dakota, one of the old west towns. quite fascinating looking at the buildings and shops while driving down Main Street.
Your destination is on the right.
Parking sign down here.
Good.
This is the Wild Bill Bar, where Wild Bill Hickok was shot and killed by Jack McCall while playing poker. Back then, it was called Saloon 10. We're now driving west on Interstate 90, which is the longest interstate highway in the US, running from Boston, Massachusetts in the east to Seattle, Washington in the west. And we cross over the border into Wyoming, our 8th state on this trip so far. Devil's Tower, Wyoming is our next stop, and as we came around this corner we caught a glimpse of it in the distance. It's a bit hazy, but we can still see it. As we get closer, we keep catching views of it. As we turn the corner, we get another good view of the tower. Even though this isn't a national park, the National Park Pass is accepted for entry. As we drive around a bit further, we notice some prairie dogs in the field. They're funny little things to watch. You can see one crossing the road. A little further around is a great view from the visitor centre. On zooming in, you can see a couple of climbers on the tower. Let's get back on the road and head for our destination for the night, Medora, North Dakota. By mistake, we missed the turn and drove into Hewlett, Wyoming, but it was worth a visit. It looks like quite an old west town.
Turn right onto Park Street, then turn right.
This is Main Street. And we even noticed Marilyn Monroe here. We're heading north now through eastern Wyoming, heading for Montana. And here's the Montana border. Montana is our 9th state for the trip and our 3rd today. This is fairly typical of the drive north through Montana. But in this section at least, there were some hills to the right to add interest. Just a brief stop to video the landscape and hills. and then back on the road. Still a long way to go to reach North Dakota. We're now driving east on Interstate 94, which runs from Billings, Montana, to Port Huron in Michigan. We're about to cross into our 10th state for the trip, North Dakota, and our 4th state today. Unfortunately, because of the road work, the North Dakota sign is right over on the other side of the road. We arrived in Medora about half an hour later, just before 7 p.m. What a day, driving through 4 states and mostly heading north. And the bigger picture. The first thing we're doing today is driving through the south unit of the Theodore Roosevelt National Park. The entrance is right near the town of Medora, where we stayed last night. We arrived before 8 a.m. and there's no one in the entrance station to check our annual pass.
Those people didn't, they just drove on.
So we went to the visitor centre and that was closed as well. So with no one to check our pass, we just proceeded into the park. On our way out of the park later, we stopped into the visitor centre and showed our pass so they could scan it. Soon after entering the park, there was an overlook that had good views over Medora. It was certainly worth the stop. Such a nice view with the fall colours of the trees in the early morning light, looking towards Medora. A little further down the road and we came across a herd of bison. Not long after, we saw these deer, and if you look in the foreground, you can see prairie dogs as well. Then more bison. A little further along the road, we came across a bison grazing nearby. There weren't any other cars around, so I just pulled up on the road so I could take some photos and videos. I was standing very close to the back of the car, just in case I had to make a dash around to get in the door. But I needn't have worried. The bison seemed quite unperturbed by our presence. We continued on to Boycott Overlook and stopped to check out the view. It's a little reminiscent of Badlands National Park. We then decided that we should start making our way back out of the national park and get on the road for the day to start heading to our next destination, as it's a long drive. We've been driving on Scenic Loop Drive in the national park, which, as the name suggests, goes in a loop. But part of the road is closed, so driving a complete loop isn't currently possible. At some time, we have to turn around and head back, so we decided this would be a good time. We turned around and started heading back out of the park. Then a little further along, we noticed something going on ahead on the road. We noticed a trike pulled off the road, keeping its distance. As we got closer, we could see there were some bison standing on the road.
Are you going to stand back?
We had been hoping to see this happen, and here it is. We had a front row seat. After a few minutes, the mother decided it was time for more grazing, so they got off the road. I think the motorcyclist was still a little apprehensive about riding past so close to the bison, but the pickup truck decided to get going. That really made our day. That was quite something to be so close to bison like that. As we were continuing on our way back out of the park, we had to wait for more wildlife to cross the road. And again, we continue on our way. But before we leave the park, we thought we'd stop for another look at the prairie dogs. Okay, we'd better head for the visitor centre for a look at the gift shop before getting on the road to our next destination.
It's at half-mast.
We're back in Montana and heading southwest on Interstate 94. Most of our drive today will be in Montana, but we dip into Wyoming while we drive along the Beartooth Highway through the Beartooth Mountains. While driving on Interstate 94, we drive alongside the Yellowstone River for a short time. The river starts in Yellowstone National Park and eventually joins the Missouri River in North Dakota. We're driving through Red Lodge, Montana. This is where the Beartooth Highway begins and continues through the Beartooth Mountains to Yellowstone National Park. The mountain views get better as we progress along the highway. We drive alongside the mountains for a while. Then we start our ascent. According to my GPS app, we gained about 1.6 kilometers in altitude driving through these mountains. Lots of hairpin bends on this road as we climb higher. I think the Beartooth Highway was one of my favourite drives on our whole trip. Very scenic. As we climbed higher, we came across this overlook, so we pulled in to check out the view. It's quite spectacular. It was so hazy that the camera had trouble keeping focus, but you get the picture. While we were enjoying the view, we were greeted by more chipmunks. When we were getting near the top, we passed a sign saying we are leaving Montana, but I don't think we saw a sign to say we crossed into
We're
Wyoming.
leaving Montana now. Where we are.
As we get closer to the top, we come across some ice still remaining from last winter, which we were surprised to see. We're still climbing higher, but we're looking at the top of the surrounding mountains, so we must be fairly close to the highest point. We come to a place to pull over, so I thought it might be worth checking out the view. The view across the road, overlooking Gardner Lake, was quite amazing. We finally made it to the top as we travelled through Beartooth Pass and begin our descent.
Well, lake's down there.
Such great views on the way down. We were admiring the fall colours when we got quite a surprise.
Oh, right across. There's another one there too.
And still more fall colours further along. As the sun sinks behind the mountains, we're still getting quite spectacular mountain views. We're back in Montana and arriving in Cook City, our destination for the evening.
Destination will be on the right.
And there's our motel on the right.
Your destination is on the right.
Here's our journey today, generally travelling southwest. And in perspective,